I'm recording now.
Nice, 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 nice.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. It's very
For
nice.
sure.
Could you please state your
Anytime.
name?
Okay, I am Quetzal Castaneda.
All right. Would you say it's okay if I call you Kets?
Oh, for sure.
um, would you say you're part of the local music scene, like Boise, Treasure Valley area?
Oh, definitely, for sure. I've played in bands around in the Treasure Valley. Well, actually, only two bands, but I go to a lot of local shows. It's really
Awesome.
fun.
How long have you been a part of this music scene?
Ever since I moved here, actually, once about 2 years ago, I moved here and started taking a look at a lot of the local venues because where I lived, well, I mean, there was a lot, but not nearly as many as
Gotcha.
there are in Boise. It's really fun.
And where did you live before this?
I lived in San Luis Obispo, California.
Gotcha.
Either I didn't look, I didn't, or I didn't, include myself into that music scene. But in Boise, it's definitely a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun experiences.
That's awesome. Um, so within the Boise music scene, um, what music genres and styles have you experienced? Like as far as shows and bands you've been in and bands you've seen?
I think I've looked at every genre. Every genre I've gone to shows to, just because I enjoy going to local shows. They're cheap, they're fun. But for the most part, I think I've gone to a lot of punk shows. Those are my favorite. I love the pit. It's fantastic.
That's awesome. um, so you'd say like punk is your favorite genre as far as local music goes?
Oh, for sure. It's cheap, and if not cheap, it's free. It's really fun.
So how would you describe the local punk scene?
So the local punk scene, it depends on what shows you go to, honestly. But the shows I enjoy the most are the ones where there's a ton of people. Everybody is, moshing their lives out of their minds out. Yeah, you caught me. You almost caught me there. But it's just fun. It's just fun being with people who are all just trying to have a good time and just dance to some really upbeat music, some hardcore music. It's fantastic.
That's awesome. So this can be for any genre or style in the Boise music scene, or it could just be for punk. But do you think that the genre, like for punk, for example, do you think it goes beyond defining a style of music and goes more into defining the fan base or the people who are into it, like defines who they are, what they believe in, and how they present themselves?
Oh, for sure. I feel like there's a lot of fans out there and a lot of I've met a lot of people in punk bands. They there's a lot of it's a whole subculture basically. They all stand for the same values, and I think that's very unique because it lets you look at life and just how we live it in a completely different way. People have their own little styles, and it's just fantastic to see like-minded people all have a fun time at a show.
Yeah. And by like-minded, that could also be like they share a similar rhetoric because they're into the same type of music. So they have kind of a same basis of communication and organization.
Oh yeah, what punk rock is mainly about, and I've experienced this myself. I hold many of the same values. Is that it's very freedom driven. People want to be free because there's a lot of things out there in the world that I mean, according to the perspectives that punk rock has given me, and how many people today see the world, in general. There's a lot of things that oppress people. Um, there punk rockers, that I've been to a couple shows where they straight up just curse out the current president, and they curse out organized religions. A lot of people have the same opinions when it comes to that, and it's shown inside their music, in the lyrical composition of their music even, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting to see.
Do you think that is in some way compounded on a local scale? Because like Boise is almost like, not to be dramatic, but almost like a slight liberal haven within a very conservative state. Do you think that makes kind of exacerbates the whole, anti-Trump and anti-far left kind of thing, or far right?
Oh,
Sorry.
definitely. I feel like Boise has their own set of politics compared to the rest of Idaho. I mean, I've lived in Emmett, I've lived in Middleton, and then I lived in Boise for a short while when I was attending Boise State. But definitely the first two places, Middleton and Emmett, they were highly, highly conservative, and compared to those places in Boise, it's very very liberal, very very what's the word? I guess free when it comes to their politics. There's a little bit more of a variety, but for the
Yeah.
most part, I consider it to be liberal.
And like with Emmett and Middleton, I think if you're looking at the Treasure Valley, you could consider that as part of the Treasure Valley music scene. Do you see like a discrepancy between like Boise, Emmett, and Middleton as far as like the music you've experienced there, as far as going to shows or maybe the bands you've been in those locations?
I mean, honestly, in those locations in particular, there's not much of a music scene just because of how small the area is. If you're trying to
Yeah.
find music, you would go to Boise, but I have played shows in Middleton, and I'll be honest, you won't get nearly as much of a crowd in Middleton as you would in Boise. And in Middleton, you have to cater to a separate audience. People won't listen to punk rock or hard rock in Middleton. They will listen to country and more bands like that because more people are into that. There's a different type of taste over there, as you might
Yeah.
say.
And a very different rhetoric because like depending on your politics, which is kind of where our conversation has gone right now, like um if you're into punk rock, you're probably, depending on what you listen to, you're probably more liberal. And if you listen to country, there's a good chance your rhetoric is more conservative aligned.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Everybody's listened to those country songs that talk about the flag and drinking beer and tractors. You know what I mean?
yeah,
You want to appeal to your audience some way, and sometimes that can be political. Sometimes that can just be, you know, the American dream, as some people might call it in
yeah.
country music, at least.
Do you think different genres have a different way of defining the American dream though? Because I think I definitely see that in punk music of like an alternative lifestyle that is just as achievable and maybe better than a you know conventional American life, I guess.
Oh, definitely, for sure. In country music, the American dream is all about, and I'm not trying to generalize whatsoever,
Yeah, I was
but
gonna
the
say, and to
American
be yeah,
dream, yep, the American dream, it's you can see it, you can experience it, and people will hold that value. It's a very conservative value, in my opinion. But in punk rock, and it goes without say that they are very, very anti-government, very much anarchist, but very much anti-hate. They think that the world could be lived without these big corporations oppressing us, without organized religion and government oppressing us. They believe that people can truly live in harmony without all this, all these things that are basically controlling us and brainwashing us. It's an entirely different rhetoric that, many people wouldn't consider until you actually sit down and maybe think about the concepts a little bit more. The way it's
yeah,
portrayed through the music, at least, it's very radical, but sometimes you gotta be that way to achieve the things that you need to achieve. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure. And like with punk music specifically, but it doesn't have to be. To kind of take a step back, I know you said you weren't as active in the last music scene you're kind of part of in California, but do you see a difference in the kind of like punk music you would find like in Southern California at your, in your local level between the punk music you'd find on like a local Boise level?
Actually, funny thing, just recently, yeah, I still have friends and family that live in California for sure, and they tell me about the local music scene in California. And what I hear is that, and what I see, on videos and just things that people have told me, is that the music scene in California is very, very diverse because there's a lot more places to play. You see a multitude of more coffee shops to play at, many more venues. There's genres that appeal to every fan. Versus in Boise, the compared to Boise, the scene is kind of, it's smaller, let's put it that way, and there's definitely a variety, but you see a lot more of alternative music in Boise compared to California, I would say.
That's really interesting. So that's interesting to think that the venues available in a local scene might define the kind of music or rhetoric you find in that scene. So, like, what venues in Boise do you think are defining the bands that come out of this area?
Huh. Well, definitely the Shredder, I would consider more a it would cater towards more metal fans, more rock fans, more punk rock fans. In my opinion, the Knitting Factory kind of has more of that country style to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, I mean, for the most part, the venues kind of do have their own styles, but they do like allow other bands to play. It's not simply limited to one style. But I think that's because they're trying to be more active in the local music scene because
For
of how
sure.
many new venues are just coming out. I heard that the Regal Beaver was starting to become a popular venue for people to go to.
Yeah. And I think that, oh yeah, Regal Beaver. That used to be Donut Days. So yeah. And I've,
Hmm.
I've seen a few punk bands there and stuff. Um, so kind of on that topic of genre, um, do you think that there's anything negative about like the genre connotations? Like we could keep talking about punk, but really any. Do you think there's anything negative about people aligning themselves with this one genre or saying I listen to this kind of music, so it might define me as a person this way?
I definitely think there's a problem with that, only because people don't think in a way. I feel like people need to sit down and take a second to think about the concepts that are being being told to them by all these local bands, because it's not just the music. Sure, it's there to I guess give you a new perspective on life and just how the band perceives it. But when people go out and identify as being a punk rocker and having certain values without any consideration for the actual ethics behind it, you become brainwashed yourself. And I think that's exactly what punk rock is trying to go against. People hold
Yeah.
their values for a reason. You can't hold your values for no reason at all. It just makes you less of an intelligent person, in my opinion.
So you said that like maybe it's these there's certain ideas that bands are preaching to their fan base even on a local level. Do you think there's a like a Boise specific ethos that might be presented through certain bands that might reoccur in local bands, or maybe just specific bands that might present ideas that you would find in the local Boise scene but maybe not in like Southern California?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, to take a step back, I don't think bands are preaching to people. I mean, in a way, in a regard, they might be just to anybody who hasn't listened to the band before, it can be perceived as preaching ideas to them. But I feel like for the most part, these bands they appeal to their audience. People who identify themselves as punk rockers, they don't go and see punk shows because, you know, it's just a random show. They go see it because it appeals to their ethics, it appeals to their beliefs. People kind of align themselves with that, and that's how they get their taste in music. And
Yeah.
I feel like in Boise in particular, they definitely have their own appeal, because I feel like the city in general, it has a more liberal swing to it. And the same thing in California too. You see a lot of that. There's a lot of alternative music, and there's a lot of like open-minded people who are willing to take those ideas that are being, I guess, preached to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of that comes through lyrics, right? Because like if you say you're a punk band, there's kind of an assumption of what your politics or your beliefs are or what your music contains, but you don't really know until you like analyze the lyrics.
In the punk scene specifically, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who, when do they hear that there's a punk band playing, they kind of already have an idea of what they're going to talk about, what their ethics are, what's going to be in their lyrics.
Yeah. Do you think in Boise there's any kind of common lyrics found within bands, like maybe topics or styles that lyrical styles that are really commonplace in Boise bands specifically that you might not find in other regions?
In Boise, you know
Or
what?
just
In
Treasure
Boise,
Valley?
you know what? Maybe it's because I haven't experienced the any scene outside of Boise, but for the most part, I feel like Boise is kind of diverse when it comes to the local scene, at least. But for sure, because of the way the city is and because of how many shows are constantly playing at different venues, I feel like there's definitely more of an alternative swing to it. People are wanting to hear music that's a little bit different from the taste that's being shown right now.
Yeah. So kind of shifting in a different direction. I think one of the defining aspects of music in the last 25 years has obviously been the internet. And I think we always think of the internet as like a globalized thing that really affects the rhetoric of music on a global scale. But do you think it also has the capacity to affect certain regions different than others? Like maybe the Treasure Valley, the rhetoric you find in the music there has been changed by the internet.
Hmm. I haven't taken too much consideration, regarding, internet influence. But I feel like if you were to go on there and search, local Boise music, you would definitely find a lot of country bands, a lot of things like that. Just because in Idaho in general, it's more conservative. But if we're talking, I mean, it depends where you look for your local music. There
Yeah.
are popular venues and unpopular venues. I just happen to have found some of the popular unpopular venues that not many people go to, like coffee shops and etc. because they're cheap, they're fun, they're cheap and they're fun to watch. Versus maybe the Knitting Factory, well, that's a little bit more expensive. You'll see a lot more country bands playing.
So
Um,
yeah. Sorry. Do you think there's also like, so you have different styles depend, that's interesting to look at like the pricing of a venue and what kind of band that attracts, because that kind of also goes with your ethos and what you believe in as far as live music goes. But do you think there's outside of like genre, do you think there's a different dynamic in those venues? Like if you were to go to a small coffee shop, maybe just the vibe between people is different than the vibe between people at like Taco Bell or the Knitting Factory?
what do you mean by that specifically? Like,
So I mean like um do you feel like it's more tightly knit maybe, or maybe they have more of their own like culture in a way? So
like
like
their
if you,
own little community, you mean?
yeah, community, exactly.
I feel like it. I mean, there's been local shows I've been to at the Shredder where I've seen the same people there all the time, and I know as a fact that if I wanted to start a pit, they would pit with me, and it would just be a fun time. I feel
Yeah.
like it does kind of develop a community, at least in the local music scene, because you see a lot of the people who have the same tastes, and you're able to make friends with them. You're able to get to know different people just through the different music that's being shown. Versus at Taco Bell, you're all strangers. I mean, unless you guys are going to bond over like liking the same taco, then I mean, I guess you're not really gonna find a community there. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and I was referencing Taco Bell Arena too, which I should
Oh,
have been clear about that. I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, you're completely fine. I mean, Taco Bell Arena. I mean, if we're talking about that, Taco Bell Arena. I feel like yeah. I mean, it's harder to find that little community at Taco Bell Arena because the venue and it holds so many people. You're never going to see the same people, and the pricings are just completely different. Maybe you won't see people frequently go to Taco Bell Arena, and there's just so many people that you would never find a community there.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I think something that's kind of on the topic of internet again, I think something that's been a huge boon for smaller venues and smaller bands is just the amount you can promote either your band or your venue or your label or your new music or whatever on the internet. How do you think that has impacted on a local level?
I think it has a decent impact. I mean, it depends on the popularity of your music. I've seen local music that's been advertised in a multitude of different ways, and they become more well known as a result. Versus the bands that don't advertise and just play to play. Although they're still known, they're not getting as much attention as they might be if they advertised. And maybe that goes because some bands they have their different ethics when it comes to advertising. I mean, there's some bands that won't sell their merch for over $5. People just have different minds, and in the local scene, you see a lot of advertising. Not, I mean, sometimes on the internet, especially like on Bandcamp and places that you can advertise for free. But for the most part, in the local music scene, you see a lot of posters. You don't see very much online advertising because you want to appeal to the people who actually live in the city, not people
Yeah.
who live around the world. You know what I mean?
And if it is online, it's kind of localized like Facebook or
Oh,
like a
for sure.
group. Yeah. Um Also like, so internet has a a huge culture on it, like countless cultures, and but I think like some of the most prominent, especially around younger people, is like meme culture and like internet joke culture and kind of like goofy stuff, but which has obviously affected, I think, music on a worldwide level. But do you think that's seeped into the like Treasure Valley music scene at all, where you kind of see internet culture intermingling?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you see cultures of punk bands advertising with SpongeBob for crying out loud. I mean, you see it online, and if you follow any of the local music venues or any of the local bands on Instagram or Facebook or any of that, you'll see those type of posters, and you'll see just kind of like that appeal to the youth in a way. It is a way
Yeah.
to advertise, but it's also appealing to the youth.
And that kind of leads into my next question. Do you think the local music scene here is youth driven?
Oh, for sure. I mean, for the most part, maybe there's underlying variables. Maybe people who are adults, they just don't have time to go experience the music scene. But because of how many youth cultures and just the youth in general, how many people have the free time to go watch shows and have that experience. I feel like it's definitely youth driven. There's a lot of attention going around in terms of, I guess, youth culture.
Yeah. So if it's youth driven, do you think that the rhetoric of youth, like just the way, every generation has their own, like, I guess, slang, you could say. Do you think that is also seeping into the music scene, like as far as lyric or just promotion or just any kind of rhetoric surrounding music goes in the local music scene?
You're talking about language.
Yeah, language.
Language in the you know what? I haven't experienced that too much myself, but I definitely know ideas are definitely passed around in the local music scene a lot more than maybe language. I mean, maybe not the local music scene, but the global music scene, definitely. There's definitely a huge influence, I would say.
Yeah. So when
And
you
I
say,
guess I guess it depends what local music scene you're talking about too.
I'm just
In
talking
Boise, I don't
about,
see it too much.
you don't see a lot of like shared language that might be unique to the area.
Well, not in my experience at least.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I don't think, honestly, I don't think the only thing I can think of is like venue names. Like that's the only thing. Like if you're like if you were to say someone, if you were to talk to someone from Seattle and you're like, oh, you know, I caught the Phets at the Shredder, they wouldn't know what you're talking about because that's a local band in a local venue, and that's really the like I haven't seen any like you know like I haven't seen any Boise centric terms for like awesome or rad or anything like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I guess maybe it's because I'm yeah, I just haven't experienced that type of slang at all.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
So just kind of ask a few wrap up questions here. Do you think there's any negative impacts just overall in the music scene and the rhetoric that might be used here?
I mean, personally, I feel that the rhetoric and just the things that are shown, the things that are portrayed by certain bands, because you see it all the time in lyrical composition of bands. You see it in just the general, the genre. But personally, I think that the music scene is it's fantastic the way it is right now. It's appealing to a lot of youth. It is bringing about new ideas that we wouldn't normally consider. It's just making an entire community of people who enjoy shows and have like-minded ideas. Sure it may be negative, just the way you might perceive it. Some people might think that those ideas and the rhetoric that's thrown about might be negative, but it's being able to look at the world in a different way and be able to develop that with a community versus alone. That just makes it, it makes it wholesome almost. It makes it a very nice community to experience.
Yeah. Do you think within the Boise or the Treasure Valley music community, there's any like ideas or new life perspectives that might be unique to the region?
I mean, for the most part, what we see in the local music scene, and like you said before, the local music scene is very much it's more liberal based. It kind of rejects those conservative ideas, and it appeals to the youth a little bit more. I feel like for the most part, the local Boise music scene is changing the perspective of the youth and overall just appealing to them. It's bringing about ideas that are completely different from the original conservative ideas of Idaho. And I think that's fantastic to see some diversity in the community. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really cool because like I'm sure there's other cities and other states like that, but Boise is such a great Boise and Moscow, honestly, are such great examples of blue cities in a red state.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So, and you were talking about perception, how like, so maybe the people in the scene are really down with it. There's more liberal attitudes that they like to see in their music and that they like to share with their friends and family. who are also in the scene. But do you think outsiders, people maybe who are outside the scene but still live in Boise or the Treasure Valley, or people just completely from another region, might look at the Treasure Valley music scene and find positive or deviant about it?
Well, I mean, it depends on the politics you align yourself with, really, and it depends on the lifestyle you align yourself with.
Yeah.
People, outside the Treasure Valley, people who live in areas primarily conservative might look at the music scene and say, "Huh, what is this? What is this that I'm listening to? What are these? What's the lyrical composition?" Maybe not as eloquently spoken, but they would question what they're being told throughout the music. And they
Yeah.
would just question the genre in general because it's unfamiliar. I feel like nowadays the alternative music scene in Boise is unfamiliar to a lot of people who haven't previously had experience with it. And personally, I think it all depends on what someone's ethics align with. If you're more conservative, you might take a second, or maybe you won't. It all depends on your perspective and on your ethics. I feel like because of the more liberal music that's been demonstrated around Boise, I feel like conservatives and people who hold a very strong belief might look at the scene and question it a bit, while people maybe from California who are very liberal might look at the music and say, "Hey, this music isn't liberal enough." I'm just kidding, but I definitely think it depends on the perspective. Really, people are different. I think Boise has its own little community right now, and it's fantastic.
That's a really interesting perspective though, because you're saying depending if you're involved in or whether you're involved in a music scene or not, depending on your surroundings, you're going to interpret other surroundings differently, which is completely understandable. But I like the idea of what you said is like, let's say like a Southern California punk rocker might go to like that show we went to, like might go to college level and might go to Phets and be like, this is really like, this is cool, but man, this isn't like nearly as like crazy or like politically charged as maybe we are.
Hmm.
And I'm not calling
You
out
know,
those bands. Those are great bands. I guess they're not. I just saying that particular. When I've seen those bands, they haven't been like putting a Trump doll in a noose or anything like that.
oh man, that's funny that you say that. There's some punk bands out there that actually do that nowadays. It's pretty fun.
Well, you
Pretty
got it.
politically driven.
So you've told me in the past that you kind of traveled around a bit with a group of people who like frequented a lot of live music events,
Oh, for sure.
like over a summer. Was that like mostly punk music that you guys went to?
For the most part, yeah. If it wasn't punk, it was metal because the purpose of that traveling was to to enjoy ourselves in the pit. Which for those who don't know, a pit is just it's basically just the mosh pit. It's just having fun and throwing people around and just living life in the moment. I think that was the biggest appeal for us at the time when we were traveling about, was to find shows that had a pit.
That's
Wasn't
awesome.
anything too politically driven. It was just simply having fun and finding those hardcore shows to pit in.
Do you think that's a big kind of rhetorical idea in the Boise scene that we're doing this as like an escape and to have fun and to get away? Do you think that's something you find here in a local music scene?
Oh, for sure. I've actually seen local bands who talk about how in a red state, sometimes these little local venues that everybody's able to create a community with and have the same ideas and values. It really is an escape from just politics and just the culture scene in Boise in general. And I think that's more for the liberal driven community, but you see it in some of the local bands that are just trying to appeal to their, I guess, anybody else.
Gotcha. Sorry, I had a bit of a technical error for some reason just then. My audio like freaked out. Um, but so like you got all choppy and I feel really bad.
You are
Like,
completely good.
just for can
Ask
you
the
like
question
can
again, I'll answer again.
yeah, can you just repeat your statement from like the last 30 seconds? You were talking
Right,
about
what good, because I think I was trailing off anyway, so ask me
oh,
your
you're
question.
good. We're just talking about how in like a local music scene, people can find like escape and relief from everyday life. And I like you brought up a point of it can be like, especially in Boise, that's probably more interpreted as like political escape. You can go with a bunch of like-minded people to a show and kind of escape. Like even in high school, no matter how liberal it is, there's still like super, weird politically charged people who might not agree with what you agree with.
Yeah, it's definitely a political escape, I feel. A lot of people who are just trying to escape the, conservative environment of Idaho, they go to these shows, especially with the liberal local bands, just to escape politics a little bit, enjoy the community of like-minded people. But I mean, in terms of, music in general, it could just be an escape from life. People want to have fun in the moment. They just want to live and experience the music. I mean, how often do people get to sit around and just watch bands play live and, just have fun with it? I mean, it definitely is an escape from everyday hardworking life for some people.
Yeah. Do you think, um, so right now we're in the midst of the COVID crisis, which is basically we can't leave the house so much. Definitely can't have live shows. Do you think long term that might be damaging to the scene? And like, do you think maybe there'll be like a rhetorical change of how, like, I think there's definitely been a rhetorical change of how live music's been perceived since like the Paris attacks and stuff like that. People are a little, I think, more wary to go to live shows. But after this whole pandemic idea, do you think it'll hurt the scene a lot?
I think economic wise, it'll definitely cause the scene a little bit of a panic, just because a lot of these local venues, they they thrive on the little money that they make from these shows to keep the business open. And if we see those disappear, then the local music scene will definitely shrink as a whole. But in terms of the bands, you still see the bands everywhere live streaming and playing their music online, which I think is really cool because people can still experience their favorite bands at home.
Yeah.
And I think people are doing a very good job doing that and keeping the scene alive. I just think economically, the scene, it might hurt the scene a lot.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. I was just thinking culturally, but economically is a really good point. Like certain venues, I don't know their background, but you kind of get the vibe this is like if people didn't come to the shows, they might be in a bad place financially.
Hmm.
Um and that's interesting what you said about the streaming, because we were talking about the internet earlier with music, and that actually might be the most impactful way recently that internet's changed local music rhetoric, because now like you have people playing online, and that's a completely I would argue that's a completely different dynamic than going to a live show, because at that point you have a chat room over a mosh pit.
Definitely, it's definitely different, but it keeps it's almost keeps it refreshing.
Yeah,
It's almost
that's true.
relieving to see that, like, even though we're trapped in our homes, we can, there's still bands that care deeply about us and want us to hear their music, despite all this stuff going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, we're pretty that's about all the questions I had, but is there anything that you want to talk more about or expand on before we wrap up? I'm all ears for anything basically.
I mean, I think we've covered most of it, in terms of rhetoric, at least. I mean,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
overall, what rhetoric is in music is it's all just appeal. I mean, bands are trying to appeal to their audience, whether it be through politics, through cultural norms that people experience through day-to-day life, whether it just be, you know, the genre in general. I mean, bands are always trying to just appeal to their audience, and I think that's fantastic because it develops a community, and it brings like-minded people together. And I just enjoy the community as a whole, and I hope to experience more of it as soon as this COVID thing is over.
That's awesome. That's a great way to sum it up. That's a question I should have just started with, like what do you consider musical rhetoric? That's awesome. Perfect. All right.
Awesome,
Thank you so much, man. That was really helpful.
for sure, dude. I appreciate you interviewing me.
For sure.